Hello, I'm Nosipho Mkhize, a life orientation lecturer. In this module, we're going to be looking at starting a lesson and how to effectively use the IYF method to get the best out of your students. We're going to look at icebreakers, their role in the learning process, and how you can use them in your lesson to introduce a topic, immediately engaging your students in the core focus of the lesson. We'll also look at how to follow up from icebreakers and how open-ended questioning and African wisdom help establish each lesson. So how do we start a lesson? Icebreakers are effective tools in getting students actively engaged with the lesson. Let's look at an example of an icebreaker. Let's assume the topic of the lesson is the importance of listening and communication. Now, how can we engage learners with the topic in a practical and interactive way? An example would be to play a game of broken telephone. Divide students into 3 groups and have each group stand in a line. Then whisper a message to the first person in each line, explaining to them that they'll need to whisper the message to the next person in the line until it reaches the last person. Then you'll ask the last student in each line to relay the message to you. You'll find often that the message gets lost or distorted. So, what have we achieved here? And how has the icebreaker worked to introduce the topic of the lesson? Well, firstly, we've proven that when a simple message is passed on, it often ends up being distorted through each chain of communication. Listening is a vital part of communication. Ask the students questions afterwards. This shows us how important listening is and provides an ideal springboard into the core topic of the lesson. Did you ask the person who whispered to you to repeat certain words? Did you remember the full message as you were whispering it to the next person? These are all questions that will guide students into thinking about how easily communication can be flawed. So, in the first 5 minutes of the lesson, you've already given students a practical learning example of the day's lesson before the lesson has even started. Your students are now in the right frame of mind to continue with the lesson and to learn from their shared experience. And now you can start asking the right questions. There are 2 primary types of questions: open-ended questions and closed questions. An example of a closed question is one that can only be answered with a yes or no. For example, did you enjoy the icebreaker? Is a closed-ended question. Students can only answer yes or no. But as you can see, they're not very practical. You don't really get any in-depth feedback from them, and they give students an easy way out of answering a question. An example of an open-ended question would be, what did you learn from the icebreaker? This question is open-ended. There is no right or wrong answer, and it encourages students to think about what they've learned. It's important to note that closed questions can be answered immediately and require little thinking time. It's either yes or no. Open-ended questions require a bit of thinking, so give your students 10 seconds or so to think before they answer. Don't push them into answering a question. If 10 seconds is not enough, rather give them a little more time than answer the question for them. Keep reminding yourself that by giving the students the answer, you're not allowing them the opportunity to think. It's not easy for many students to answer the question in front of their peers. It's often daunting and takes a bit of bravery. Be respectful of your students' answers, opinions, and contributions. Thank them for sharing their opinion and views. If a student doesn't give you an answer that you are looking for, encourage their thought process. Don't shut it down. Instead of responding to a misguided answer by ignoring it or simply saying no, engage with your students, asking them, why do you think that? Or soften your response with, that's not quite correct, but I appreciate your answer, and well done for trying. It is affirming for students to know that they are allowed to be wrong. Being wrong is part of the learning process. Remind your students that if we thought we were always right, we would never learn anything. Lastly, do not bark questions at your students if they're struggling to respond. Stay calm and friendly. Try rephrasing the question if you can see that students are battling, or give them a hint or a clue. You are not there to judge students' answers or to force them into delivering the answer that you want. You are there to facilitate thinking, learning, and the sharing of views and opinions. Before splitting your students into groups, providing them with an African wisdom is another means of helping your students think about the aims and the objectives of the lesson. An African wisdom is a line or a quote that encapsulates the topic of discussion. It's like an idiom or a catchphrase that clearly summarizes the topic at hand in an African context. So, for example, in our lesson on listening, you can display the African wisdom that connects with the topic of listening, such as one must talk little and listen much. Rather than trying to over-explain the African wisdom, get students to analyze it themselves. Ask questions like, what does this quote mean in terms of listening? What is your understanding of this quote? So, to summarize, how do you start a lesson? 1. Use an icebreaker to engage students and create a shared learning experience on the lesson's topic. 2. Ask open-ended questions to assess students' prior knowledge and opinion on the lesson's topic. 3. Introduce an African wisdom to communicate the lesson's topic and provoke further thought and engagement from students. And why is this process effective? 1. Icebreakers engage students with the topic on a practical level and prepare them for discussion. 2. Open-ended questions help you determine where your students' prior knowledge lies and guide you on how to focus the lesson. 3. The African wisdom frames the lesson topic, giving students another opportunity to visualize lesson content and prepares them for further engagement with it. How you teach is as important as what you teach. It's difficult for anyone to dive in cold into a topic. By breaking the ice with a practical game, clearly framing the lesson content and getting your students' views and opinions means students are going to feel less intimidated when going into a group or class activity. And ultimately, that's what you want. You don't want students who are concerned if they are right or if they're wrong. You want students who are engaged and ready to learn.